Hey, Woodside students, this is Pastor Evan here, and I am bringing you the last message in our summer series called Questions. Over this last summer, we looked at some questions that you have as students, or maybe your friends have. Questions like, how do we deal with temptation? Or what do we do with anxiety? Or why is it important to be in community? Well, we're going to wrap up this series with our last question is, how do we deal with disappointment? We face disappointment a lot of different times. Maybe it's we don't get on this team that we wanted, or we don't get the grade that we thought we could get on a test, or that we can't even play sports. I know a lot of times our disappointments are magnified during this season. We're not going to be able to go back to school the way that we thought, or our sports season is canceled. There's a lot of things that we can become disappointed with in this season. But it's important for us to realize, how do we deal with those disappointments? Because how we deal with those disappointments matters. We can either let them hold us captive, or let us be free from those disappointments. And so we're going to jump into God's word today and see, what does his word say about how to deal with disappointments? And whether you're facing a disappointment right now, maybe you're feeling 5 different disappointments, or you're not even disappointed, but you will be. And I think it's important for us to understand, what does God's word say about dealing with disappointments? And so as we jump in, I want to go to a book in the Old Testament, Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 29, and there's a famous verse that we see oftentimes quoted, and it's Jeremiah 29:11. It says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to give you a hope and a future." And we see that this verse is so encouraging to us. And it helps us to see that there is a plan, that God is in control. But I wanted to look a little bit around that passage. I want us to look at the context of that passage, because I think it's so important, especially when we talk about disappointments, to see what is going on around what Jeremiah is saying in this passage. And so, to give you kind of a synopsis, Jeremiah 29 is titled "A Letter to the Exiles." And so what this means is the Jewish people were in exile. They were taken from their home, and they were brought into another country. At that time, there was a lot of wars between nations, and nations often, when they would take over a country, they would take people and bring them to their country to be servants, to work and to live there. And so Jeremiah here is writing this letter to those who have been taken from their home. And you can imagine that aspect of being taken from what you've known, from your home, from your family, from your surroundings, and brought to this new place, and not knowing for how long. And so Jeremiah is writing this passage, or writing this letter to them to encourage them, to tell them what God is saying, because Jeremiah is a prophet, which means he's a messenger of God. And so he opens this letter, and he basically tells them to not long for home, to not just sit there and do nothing in this native land, but he says to continue life, to continue to do life even in the context they're in, to be married, to tend fields, to buy land, to find wives and husbands for their kids, to make this nation prosperous while they're in it. It's kind of like this idea, if you were going to Canada, and you were going to Canada and you had no ability to return to the United States, so you would buy land, you would get involved in the local community, you would make Canada better. And this is what the same thing that Jeremiah is saying. He's like, go and do life. Even though this is not the most ideal situation, although there is times when you want to be back home, do life, because this is your current situation. And so Jeremiah is saying, do this stuff. But then he says that God says that they're going to be there for 70 years. For 70 years, that's a really long time. And so this exile was going on for a long time. So they could have easily dealt with this disappointment, dealt with this change in their life for 70 years, but be disappointed the whole time, to be angry, to be bitter, to be frustrated. But what Jeremiah is encouraging them, what God is encouraging them to do is live life where they're at. To live life where they're at, even amidst the disappointment. You know, and I think that speaks to us this day, is we can't control what's going on. You know, everything is going around us. Schools are making decisions, and people are making decisions about what to do, and nobody knows really everything. And so there's a lot of disappointments with that. But here's the thing, life still goes on. Life still goes on. There's still there's still breath in your lungs. You still have the ability to talk with people, and maybe in different ways. So you can still live life. Even amongst your disappointment, it's not the end of the world. Yeah, you can't do sports in the fall, but have to wait till spring. You can still, there's ways to still do that. You know, life still goes on. And so I encourage you, even in the midst of disappointments, to have perspective of like, you know what, this is not the way that I thought it would be, but I'm going to make the best, and I'm going to live life the way that I can, because life is still going on. You still have life to live. You know, and then he continues, and then he goes on, and that famous passage in verse 11, it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." You know, and again, this verse is talking to these people who are disappointed, who are away from home, where they were taken into exile, and really because of their disobedience to God, and that was a consequence. But they needed to do that. And that was God's plan. And we see from this verse is God has a plan for everything. Even the worst things that we can imagine, God is using for our good. That he has a plan, and we can try and have trust in that. So even in our disappointments, we need to have trust. We need to trust in God and trust in his plans, and know that those plans are really for our good. You know, and I'm reminded of another passage in Romans chapter 8. And verse 28, it says, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose." You see that? All things. It doesn't just say all the good things. It doesn't say all the exciting and happy things, but he says all things. Even in the things that are tough, even the things that are disappointment, God is using all things for good. And so we can trust in that same fact. So when you're going through a disappointing time, when you're grieving maybe a lost opportunity or a lost trip or not being able to do certain things, you know, knowing that God has a plan and that we can trust in him, and all things are going to work for our good, and that he's using our life. He's using all the things that are going on to make us better and to make us more like himself. He's using these for our good. And then in Psalm chapter 34, what do we do when we deal with disappointment? What does Psalm chapter 34 tell us of how we deal with disappointment? It says this. It says, "When the righteous cry for help, the Lord hears and delivers them out of their troubles. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit." You know, I think a lot of times when we deal with disappointment, we feel like God is at distance, that he's not around us, that he's not doing what we think he needs to do. But we see here that God is God, and he has far bigger plans than what we can think of. That even the small things that we lose seem big to us, but they're very small to him. And he's maybe even protecting us from different things. Oftentimes when God says no to something, it's because he has a greater plan, and he's a greater purpose for us. And sometimes he's using it as a protection. Maybe there was something that was going to happen that wasn't going to be good. You know, we don't know all the things that God knows, but we know that he is in control, and he knows what's going on, and he is good, and he is loving, and he is caring. And so we can trust in that. And then I love what this verse says. It says that he is near us. When we cry for help, when we cry out in our frustration, when we cry out in our disappointments, he is there for us. And he is there to comfort us. He's near us. So what does that mean for our disappointments? We're going to have disappointments. It's not going to be a question of if, but when. It's okay to be disappointed. It's okay to grieve the things that we wish that we had, or the way that it should be different. But we need to also remember that God is in control, that he has brought us through so many different things. He has protected us from things. He has changed our path sometimes for our and always for our good. So cry out to him and ask him and seek his desires for your life. Maybe because you're not able to play sports, maybe you're able to connect with people in a different way. Maybe you're able to spend more time with your family. Maybe because you didn't get to go to homecoming or go back into school, and maybe it's because you're able to learn different things. Maybe you're able to be more of a light to those in the world. Maybe through everything with virtual learning and stuff. Maybe, we don't know all that God has planned, but we can trust in the fact that God is working it for our good. And so that's how we deal with disappointment. And so I encourage you to use this time to just seek him, to follow God, to pray that he uses us in amazing ways, because he is. We have seen so many things happen that are so much good, that people are coming to know Christ during this time. And it was because people decided to not fall into the trap of disappointment that will only keep us down. That's one of the things with disappointment, is when we focus and continually focusing on the things that we seem to be missing out, we're losing sight of the things that are way better for us. We're losing out what God is doing in our lives. And so I encourage you during this time to not to grieve those disappointments, because it is sad, but then also seek to ask God, how are you going to use this new season in our lives? How are you going to use these situations for our good and for the good of the world? I love you guys. We miss you, and we hope to kick off this next year together in whatever way that looks. But know that I'm praying for you in this new season. And I encourage you to watch these past videos if you've missed them, or share them with friends who you know have these questions. But it's been just an incredible summer, just diving into God's Word and asking some of these questions that maybe you have or your friends have. But that's all for us, and we'll see you guys soon.